Hello, welcome to Silent Discussions and Debates. I'm Kate Meyer. I am one of 5 MLTI ambassadors working with the Maine Department of Education. My job as an ambassador is to provide instructional coaching and professional learning around digital citizenship, technology integration, and digital instructional design to teachers in the state of Maine. My role as an MLTI ambassador is a 2-year position. There are 5 of us, and we were all in the field as educators last year. Prior to my work as an MLTI ambassador, I spent 21 years as an English teacher and a design thinking teacher, mainly at Mount Desert Island High School in Bar Harbor. And when my 2-year appointment as an MLTI ambassador is finished, I will return back to my classroom. I am so excited that you're here today to learn about silent discussions and debates. So what are we going to go over in our time together? First, we're going to start with what are silent discussions, and then we'll look at how we facilitate those. And then we'll do the same with silent debates. So what are they? And then how might we facilitate a silent debate in our classroom? Then I'm going to share with you some of my favorite tech tools for silent discussions and debates. I have a few resources for you, and then we will conclude. So let's look at what are silent discussions. Silent discussions are exactly what they sound like. So they are discussions that are held in silence. And I'm not really an advocate for a silent classroom. However, there are times when silence can and should be used as part of your teaching toolkit. In his book, Progress, Martin Robinson notes that silent discussions are a dialogue of minds rather than of voices. And that's because all communication is done in writing, or maybe you add images and GIFs and videos and hyperlinks. It all depends, of course, on the platform you're using and the task at hand. But I really love this idea of creating a dialogue of minds, because often, and I'm sure you've experienced this, we tend to go to a dialogue of voices. So in a silent discussion, every member of the class is given equal opportunity to voice their thoughts. And everyone is then exposed to a wide range of diverse opinions. Silent discussions allow us to access and activate students' prior knowledge and help students make connections and learn from the collective wisdom of the group. Research notes that dialogue and conversation are cornerstones to our approach when helping students try out and develop new ideas. But as we know, not all learners are equally comfortable at participating in group verbal discussions. Silent conversations capitalize on the social nature of learning by asking students to share their thinking and to build from and reflect on the thinking of others. Silent discussions are great because they allow students the time that they need to quietly formulate and write down their ideas before they say it. So, how might we facilitate a silent discussion? One of the elements of silent discussions as a teacher that I love is that it's incredibly low prep and it's an incredibly high engagement strategy. The first thing that you're going to do is create a space for your digital discussion. So today I'm going to show you an example of a silent discussion that I've done on Google Slides, but there are many other platforms that would work well, and I will talk about some of those later. Then you're going to choose a stimulus for students to wonder about, to debate, to mull over. This stimulus can be, questions that you pose, problems that you pose, quotations from text, excerpts from text, ideas, images, anything in your curriculum that you use to provoke thinking in your students. Then you'll introduce the students to the activity, get them logged into the platform that you're going to be using to host the discussion, and then really you'll just begin. And I'm going to talk about the specifics of what that looks like on the next slide. And this is where then you, as the educator, can observe the silent discussion or join in and become a part of the conversation. At the conclusion of your silent discussion, you'll have your students move on to your next steps. So that's where you'll then decide, what are they going to do at the conclusion of a silent discussion? Will you have them reflect on the process? Maybe they'll reflect on what they learned. Will you hold a whole class discussion to process all of the new ideas that they were exposed to? Or is this going to be a standalone assessment? One thing that I love to do at the conclusion of a silent discussion is have students choose the top 3 most important comments or questions that came up and then share those with the whole class. I think it makes for a really great whip around activity, which again just keeps that engagement high, and it allows the groups to hear what each other group was discussing. So there are so many avenues to head down at the conclusion of a silent discussion. It's really all up to your class's goals. So the blue slide that you're seeing here on the pink computer is a slide that I pulled from a silent discussion that I did last year after my students listened to a series of podcasts that all connected thematically around the idea of the American dream. We were in the middle of doing American Dream book clubs, so you'll see on some of these slides that they've got titles of their books that they're working with as well. The first time I use this strategy with students, I write the questions. So if we're working with an excerpt of a text, I use big, broad questions like, what themes are you seeing and how are they being developed? Which moment in the text is most memorable and why? What connections can you make to your own experiences or observations? And I'm sure in your content area, you have big, broad questions that are your go-to questions as well. So those are great to give students for your very first silent discussion experience. Because this slide that you're looking at came from our second silent discussion together as a class, what you're actually seeing here is a student-generated question based on interest in the topic, which was the American Dream, and all of the resources that we had been studying together up until this point. So you'll begin by explaining to your class that the activity involves responding to the questions that they see on the slides by writing their thoughts in one of these thought bubbles and sharing their thinking. When using Google Slides for this activity, I have students initial their work so that I can see their contributions. So you can see that on the slides where the students have their initials in there. It allows me to use it as an assessment, formative or summative, if I choose to do that with these conversations. I then put students into small groups, and my groups tend to be between 5 and 7 students for this. And, 3 is normally my magic number for collaborative work in the classroom. But for silent discussions, I've really found that it works best if your groups are just a little bit bigger than 3. And really, you could have groups of 10 if you wanted. For silent discussions, a little bit bigger for collaborative grouping is better. Each group gets its own slide deck. And so I make sure that, if I'm doing groups of 5, I'm giving that group a slide deck of 5 slides. If you're in a group of 6, then that group is getting a slide deck of 6 slides. So there is 1 slide per student. I either put in the questions myself, or I have students prepare for the silent discussion by writing their own open-ended discussion question. And then they'll put that question at the top of the slide once they get their slide deck. And then really we're ready to jump in. So I set a timer for 3 minutes. I instruct my students to read the question on the slide that they're on, and then pick one of those, thought bubbles and begin to write their thoughts. Again, I have 1 student on a slide at a time. So if you're in a group of 5, you've got 5 different slides with 5 different questions. And they get a full 3 minutes to read the question and write their thoughts. At the end of 3 minutes, we advance to the next slide all at the same time. So there's always going to be 1 student on a slide at a time. For the next slide, I tell them to read the question and then read whatever answers are already there, and then add their thoughts on the question or directly respond to somebody else. And then we all advance to whatever our next slide is together, and we keep moving together that way until everyone has rotated through all of the questions in the slide deck. Having the discussions captured in this way allows the students to go back later and pull what they need for whatever your next steps in your classroom are. So in this instance, I used this strategy as a way to capture students' thinking and initial ideas, knowing that at the end of the unit, these groups were going to be scripting and producing podcasts together, and they would have these notes to start to pull from for their conversations for their podcast. So when the silent discussion is over, it's on to the next steps. In this example, my next steps were for the small groups to process their silent discussion using a Jamboard. So I asked them to discuss what overall themes emerged in the silent discussion and how were these themes developed in your book club book. In the synthesis activity, I asked them to develop 2 statements of themes after reading through the silent discussion, and then to represent their ideas about the themes and how they are developed in their book club book using images. And so they created these in their small groups. They had pretty rich discussion in their small groups because they had already had this period of time where they were holding silent discussions about the theme, and then they were able to then look at how that played out in their books. And then they were able to share these out with the whole class so that each book club group got to hear what the others were doing. Again, what you do at the conclusion of a silent discussion is up to you and your class's goals. Sometimes they are a standalone formative or summative assessment. Sometimes I use them to document our thoughts so that we can come back to them later. Sometimes we simply reflect on the process and how it feels to engage in a silent discussion. All right, that's a silent discussion. We're now going to move on to what are silent debates. So this is another strategy that my students love. Of course, students love debate. My students love debate. They want to do it in their style, though. And so that often involves domination and crushing down others' ideas with the ultimate goal of winning. And that's not really the style of debate that I necessarily want to foster in my classroom. So after a particularly heated classroom debate a few years ago, I searched for a better way to teach my students the skills required for a thoughtful debate and came across the idea for Debate 2.0, which is a silent debate strategy. I actually learned this debate from an educational blogger. Her name is Jill Pavitz, and she had an educational blog with this as one of her strategies. I can no longer find that blog page to share with you, but I have enough of it captured from my own practice that I'm able to share with you here. But just know that it's all adapted from Jill Pavitz's work with Debate 2.0. So silent debates help to slow everything down so that students can really think about ideas and formulate their responses thoughtfully. It takes away the performance aspect of a traditional classroom debate, and it can be a great way to prepare them for a more formal oral debate later. This strategy helps students practice the art of argumentation. It allows all voices to be heard and helps them hear the voices of others as well. The calm, quiet nature of Debate 2.0 gives them the space to practice their critical thinking and problem-solving skills. We are in a time now where everything happens so quickly and so loudly that we often don't take time to create this kind of space. Our students probably don't even know how to create the space, so silent debates do it for them so that they can focus on their skills. When I first learned about silent debates, I was struck by how this strategy also created the space for students to really analyze their own ideas. The focus wasn't all on challenging their opponents. Students were actually tasked with actually challenging their own ideas. And maybe now more than ever, it's important to listen to the ideas of others, to think critically about the information presented, and to analyze our own views and how and why they're formed, and then have the flexibility of thought to be able to change our viewpoint when presented with new information. The silent debate does all of that. All right, so how do we facilitate these magical silent debates? Well, just like silent discussions, silent debates are very low prep and very high engagement. So there are a few more steps you'll see here to facilitating a silent debate than there were for a silent discussion. The first thing you're going to do is get your students into groups of 4 and then divide that group of 4 into 2 teams of 2. So you have a team A and a team B, and go ahead and let them give their team names if that is something that they desire. Then you will pose your debatable question or your debatable statement, whatever it is that they're going to debate the topic. You will then give students time to research support for their argument. Maybe you give them a class period to research their side. So if they're on the affirmative side and they are pro statement, or they are on the negative side and they are arguing the con side of the statement, they'll have time to do research. So you've got your team A working together and your team B working together to complete research to support their argument. I then have students write their opening positions so that when we begin the debate, they know where they're starting. They know how their argument is starting. So team A opens up their Google Doc where they're tracking all of their research and their ideas that they're finding to support their argument, and they go ahead and write that opening position so that they are ready to go. When it's time to have the debate, we jump right in, and I will talk a little bit more about that on the next slide. And then when the debate rounds are over, there's time for judging and some reflection. So in practice, it might look like this. You've put your students into groups of 4. You've divided them into 2 teams, A and B. Each team, A and B, is given class time, or maybe they do it for homework, depending on the nature of your course. They're given time to research and gather evidence that will support their argument in the topic that they are debating. So like I said, I might assign team A to the affirmative and team B to the negative, or however you want to do that. Teams A and B each create a Google Doc that they share with each other for notes and sources that back up the argument. So you've got 2 students who are team A, and they are sharing a Google Doc of resources, and then your team B is doing the same. A and B teams work together to build arguments and take notes in their Google Doc. And this is the information that they will have to use during the debate. And it's the only information that they will have to use during the debate. So they want to get as much as possible into this document in order to be able to refute the other team's position. I always have them script out their opening position before the debate so they have a clear beginning point. Then when it's time for the debate, students sit across from each other. So team A, student 1, will sit across from team B, student 1. Team A, student 2, will sit across from team B, student 2, because that is who they are debating. And now they're going to debate that person using their notes and the research that they prepared with their partner prior to the debate. I do 4 rounds. So I might start with team A, let team A do their opening statement, and then team B's opening statement, and then team B's refutation of team A's statement, and then team A's refutation. And so I'll kind of flip flop who begins and who ends for 4 rounds. Students are only allowed to have 2 documents open during the debate. They cannot do any additional internet research. So their first document are the notes that they created on the previous day with their partner. And the second document is the document that they are using to host the debate. And that is just a blank Google document. So team A, person 1, and team B, person 1, then have a blank document between them, which is where they're holding their written debate. I do about 40 minutes for the debate in total. So that's about 10 minutes per round. And then we have 10 minutes for judging after that. Judging is actually done by sharing the debate document with another team in the room who reads through and decides which argument is the strongest. All students then become judges because they each get a document from the rounds, and they also sometimes, if there's time, I have them defend what led them to choose the winner. So they're even creating an argument in the judging round. And then maybe 10 more minutes for judges to present their findings. A really fun piece to observe is that during the debate, the students want to talk, but they know that they can't. And so it's really fun to watch them because they will resort to facial expressions and body language to communicate maybe the strength of their argument or their disagreement with their opponent's argument. I don't allow any noise, like no sighing, no snapping, no clapping. Like they'll want to try to make noise in other ways, and I just don't allow it, which at the end, if you're doing a debrief or a reflection, can lead to really great discussion about how we use nonverbal communication too. I really love Debate 2.0 for so many reasons, but I can kind of narrow it down to a few talking points for you. So I love that students sit directly in front of their opponent. They are facing each other. So even though it might feel, because they're communicating via a Google document, that they are communicating online, they actually have the person right in front of them. So there's a reminder that there's somebody on the receiving end of their digital responses. Again, that is a great observation to make while you're watching your students do the silent debates, and then to debrief that with them, because that's something I think maybe we often forget when we are commenting online in our regular lives. Also, technology is used meaningfully. It's not just dropped in with maybe no purpose. You definitely need technology to support this activity. And all students have a role in the debate. Everybody's researching. Everybody is participating in the silent debate itself. And my students love a challenge. They also really like to win, and they get all of that with the silent debate. So all of the reasons that they kind of wanted to hold oral debates, they get those feelings with the silent debate too. It just slows everything down so that we can do it really thoughtfully. So let's talk about some tech tools that I have used for silent discussion and debate. This list, of course, is not exhaustive. These are just the ones I have used and have found to be really good. So I love Google Slides and Jamboard because there's a great visual aspect to both of those. Google Documents, of course, for silent debates when you want students to really develop their ideas in writing. I also love Padlet, and that hyperlink will take you right to the Padlet site. It's great for visual threaded discussions, and especially great if you want students to embed images and video and audio. It can all be done in Padlet. And the teacher can set up the format, how you want it to be threaded. And it's just a really smooth platform for silent discussions. I also really love Google Classroom if you're looking for more of a threaded silent discussion. So more like what you would see on a message board. If you post a question, then that will create a threaded discussion that exists right in your Google Classroom. So that's a great spot if you are using that tool. And then my ultimate favorite place actually to do this is a web-based platform for threaded silent discussions called Parlay. And this is a hyperlink that will take you right there. It is an incredible web-based platform that offers a ton of features for students and teachers. And one of the features that my students particularly loved in Parlay was that they could have anonymous identities. The teacher could see who everybody was, but they saw these anonymous identities. And it really, the feedback from my students was that it just freed them up to make mistakes and not feel self-conscious. And they just thought that that was probably the most incredible feature for them. I highly recommend you check out Parlay. It tracks data that you can share with your students. It creates these beautiful graphs that you can reflect upon in terms of participation. I just have so many wonderful, nice things to say about Parlay. All right, this is a rinse and repeat strategy. John Hattie suggests that we commit to a triple cycle, whereby we are trying out a strategy in at least 3 different ways, or maybe in 3 different lessons before we kind of make up our minds about it. This gives us a chance to tweak, refine, and play with it. So in a semester-long class, I have 4 units, and I will do a silent discussion or silent debate in each of those 4 units. So in my classroom, it does get repeated 4 times, and I might change it up a little bit each time. So maybe the first time we use Google Slides, then the next time we use Parlay, right? So you can change it up as you go. But what you're going to notice is that after several runs of doing silent discussions, your students are going to become more comfortable, more confident, and more skillful. A written conversation changes classroom dynamics because it slows that thinking down and makes everyone really focus on the ideas and the views of others. It can make students more contemplative, thoughtful, and philosophical, and it also creates a superb visual record of their thoughts, opinions, and questions. So I have a few resources for you here on the slide. These are all hyperlink out to resources for you. I highly suggest you, if you're only going to check out one of these resources on this list, that you check out the first one, Virtual Discussion Problems. This is a podcast and blog post by my favorite educational podcaster, Betsy Potash, who has the Spark Creativity podcast and blog. And not only does she go through lots of different solutions for discussion in your classroom, including silent discussions, she also will send you a free slide deck to use for silent discussions that's already created with those little thought bubbles and everything, so that really it's incredibly low prep for you. Thank you so much for attending and watching this professional development with me. Please do reach out if you have any questions or you want to brainstorm further about how you might use silent debate and discussion in your own classes. The green text will send you, if you click there, to a link for the feedback form. And when you submit your feedback form, the thank you screen that pops up will then have a link to your professional development certificate if you are collecting hours. I appreciate your attendance in this professional development, and I will see you next time.